This morning I'm going to be talking about 3 ways to live your life. In the talk this morning, I'll be also sharing a bit of a lengthy story about a hermit that lives on a mountain and an emperor that went to visit him. They asked the emperor to answer 3 questions. It's a beautiful story. It's a little involved, so you'll want to pay attention, or if you zone out, you're going to miss some of the real important parts. So we'll be talking about 3 and 3 this morning, 3 ways to live your life, and the 3 questions that the emperor is going to have of the hermit on the mountain. This morning's talk is going to encourage us to look at the foundation of our life. Rarely do we take time to do this. In fact, I don't think I've ever done that, to really take time to look at the foundation of what my life is. It's a wonderful experience. It's very beautiful. It's very affirming. Puts you back into balance in relationship to your day-to-day life and your spiritual life. The great ones have always emphasized, as Christ did, that the foundation of our life is more important than anything else. Everything springs forth from our foundation. It is the foundation of our life that demonstrates our motives. Not only our motives, but the expression of our motives as well. The measure of a person is determined by his deepest motive. It takes a lot of thought, and you might want to listen to it a couple of times, but it will be well worth your effort. So in other words, when the measure of a person is determined by his deepest motive, what that means is that what is found at the core of all that he is or all that he does is his deepest motive. Whatever is found in that core. It's so interesting. So we need to ask ourselves, what is the motive behind, for example, each one of my relationships? What is my motive for being with this person or that group of people? If our motives are noble and our relationships are a high order, then we are going to be an advancing light. Without pure motives in our relationships, whatever we build will fall apart. That's without pure motive. In other words, if our motives in being with this person or with that group of people are self-centered or ignoble, what we are building is going to fall apart. So let's not just make, these words as part of our accumulated knowledge, but really think about it. Think about a relationship we've had that fell apart, and then look at the motive behind or at the core of that relationship. We're going to learn a lot about ourselves and about the formulation of that relationship, whether it was with a partner or whether it was with a group or even a country. What would be our motive for moving to another country, for example? And if our relationship with that country falls apart, then we know that we had an impure motive. Great ones tell us that as we advance, we will be tested by fire. Fire will reveal what the real foundation is. When the building burns, the foundation remains for all of us to see. It is not how much money you have. It is not your titles. It is not your positions or your certificates that stand the tests of fire, the fire of life, but only the noble motives of the soul. So there are three basic kinds of motive in life, or three ways that we can live our life. The first category is to live at the expense of other people. To live at the expense of other people. In this stage, each person uses others for his own benefit or for his own gain. In other words, that kind of reality of how that person is living their life is going to say, as they move into that relationship, what is in it for me? What can I get out of it? The advantage may be money, it may be knowledge, that may be prestige or position. But always an advantage over others is sought. So pay attention to what I am saying, and then as you evaluate your motives in your relationships, see if this is the category in which you live. And of course, unless we're really honest with ourselves, we're going to say, well, no. We'll say, no, of course I don't live, in this relationship with that way. But you may find a tad of truth somewhere in that motive that put you into that relationship or into a relationship with that group. In other words, in this first way of living, you're going to live at the expense of other people. Honestly, I think it's just human nature. When we're really young, we try to build a relationship, maybe not so much at the expense of another person, but what can I get out of this relationship? The second way of living is as you begin to live with one another. When you begin to live with one another instead of at each other's expense. It is a sign of progress when people stop using each other and begin to cooperate. When the motive is to live with others, others' needs are taken into account. So that's what it means to live with one another, that we think of the other person. In other words, we take their needs into account through our actions. Before we make an action, right? We begin to think about the need of the other person. And that's the second category. The third category, or way of living, is a little bit more rare. The third way of living exists for human beings who learn how to live for one another. See how it goes from one stage to the next to the next if we progress in our spiritual maturity. In this third stage, other people come first. This is actually possible in relationships between two people, even between yourself and your family, yourself and your group, or in any association. There's a lot we could talk about, and maybe you'll have a little bit of time at the end of the lecture today to really think about, how do you live in such a way that other people come first and you don't short-circuit yourself? Well, I can tell you one way is that person is going to have self-confidence. A person knows who they are. They know who they are not. They have a sense of purpose. They have joy in their life. The more we have joy in our life, the more accumulated confidence based on self-confidence that we have, that's when we begin to realize that if we want to increase our joy, if we want to increase our self-confidence, then we need to place other people ahead of ourselves. The rewards are without number. It's numberless, in other words. So the most important question you can ask yourself is, what are your motives? Are you using your spouse, your friendships, your group? So many relationships are formed on this basis, but they have no foundation. And as such relationships, and as the result of this is that your relationships are going to dissolve, they're going to fail. If you observe what happens to people whose motive is to live at others' expense, you will see the truth of what I am saying. In the second way of living with one another, now this is a little different. It is at this stage people live or work together because it supports their mutual interests. This is the level of, let's say, you help me and I will help you. But to live in the third way of living, at the third stage of living, pure motive is very advanced compared to the first two ways of living. In living for one another, we know that we exist only to make one another beautiful, without expecting anything in return. This is an example of living a life of sacrificial service, which I talked about last week. Those who live by using others are selfish people. Now, you may be sitting there and saying to yourself, well, I know all of this, and I know where I fit in with this, but do you know where your relationships fit into these three stages? Are there people in your environment that are using you at your expense for them, for themselves? Or are there people in your relationships that say, I will help you if you will help me? Which is not so bad. See what I'm saying is we want to observe and understand and to better understand all of our relationships. Why, for example, why am I in a relationship with this group? Am I here at the expense of others? Am I here to help one another? Or am I here to put that group ahead of myself? Here's a story. Well, let me back up a minute. This is too important to miss. A person who lives at the expense of others is a kind of thief. He looks for the right moment to seize an advantage. And we see this in the group life. So if you're really enmeshed in the group life the way I am, you need to be, as a leader, aware of such kind of people. Because if they're going to look for the right moment to seize an advantage, that advantage will be at the expense of the group. And when that happens, disunity occurs. As long as this is a person's character, he can never grow spiritually. So why be in a spiritual group? So here's the story. One day, it occurred to a certain emperor that he only knew the answers to 3 questions. He could never stray in any matter. What is the best time to do each thing? That was the first question. What is the best time to do each thing? The next question is, who are the most important people to work with? The third question, what is the most important thing to do at all times? Let me read these questions again. What is the best time to do something or to do each thing? What are the most important people to work with? And what is the most important thing to do at all times? The emperor issued a decree throughout his kingdom announcing that whoever could answer the questions would receive a great reward. Many who read the decree made their way to the palace at once, each person with a different answer. But the emperor was not happy with any of their answers. After several nights of reflection, the emperor resolved to visit a hermit who lived up on the mountain and was said to be an enlightened man. The emperor wished to find the hermit to ask him the 3 questions, though he knew the hermit never left the mountains and was known to receive only the poor, refusing to have anything to do with people of wealth or power. So the emperor disguised himself as a simple peasant and ordered his attendants, this is an important part of the story, and ordered his attendants to wait for him at the foot of the mountain while he climbed the slope alone to seek the hermit. Readying the holy man's dwelling place, the emperor found the hermit digging a garden in front of his hut. When the hermit saw the stranger, he nodded his head in greeting and continued to dig. The labor obviously was very hard on the hermit. He was an old man, and each time he thrust his spade into the ground to turn the earth, he heaved heavily. The emperor approached him and said, "I have come here to ask your help answering my 3 questions." The hermit listened attentively, but only patted the emperor on his shoulder and continued digging. The emperor said, "You must be tired. Here, let me give you a hand with that." The hermit thanked him, handed the emperor the spade, and then sat down on the ground to rest. Time went on, but the hermit did not answer the emperor's questions. After several hours of digging, the emperor politely asked the hermit if he did not intend to answer his questions. If he didn't, then he would leave. The hermit lifted his head and asked, "Do you hear someone running over there?" They both saw a man with a long white beard emerge from the woods. He ran wildly, pressing his hands against a bloody wound in his stomach, and the man ran toward the emperor before falling unconscious. Opening the man's clothing, the emperor and the hermit saw that the man had received a deep gash. The emperor cleaned the wound thoroughly and then used his own shirt to bandage it, but the blood soaked it within minutes. He rinsed the shirt out and bandaged the wound a second time and continued to do so until the flood of blood stopped flowing. Say that again. The hermit gave the emperor a hand in carrying the man into the hut, and the man closed his eyes and lay quietly. The emperor was worn out from a long day of climbing the mountain and digging the garden. Leaning across the doorway, he fell asleep. When he woke up, he looked over to the bed, and he saw the wounded man also looking around in confusion. When he saw the emperor, he stared at him intently. And then he said in a faint whisper, "Please forgive me." "But what have you done that I should forgive you?" asked the emperor. "You do not know me, your majesty, but I know you. I was your sworn enemy, and I had vowed to take vengeance on you, for during that last war you killed my brother and seized my property. When I learned that you were coming alone to the mountain to meet the hermit, I resolved to surprise you on your way back and to kill you. But after waiting a long time, there was still no sign of you. And so I left my ambush in order to seek you out. But instead of finding you, I came across your attendants, who recognized me, giving me the wound. Luckily, I escaped and ran here. But if I hadn't met you, I would surely be dead by now. I had intended to kill you, but instead, you saved my life. I am ashamed and grateful beyond words. If I live, I vow to be your servant for the rest of my life, and I will bid my children and grandchildren to do the same. Please grant me your forgiveness. The emperor not only forgave the man, but promised to return all his property and to send his own physician and servants to wait on him until he was completely healed. Then the emperor returned to see the hermit. Before returning to the palace, the emperor wanted to repeat his 3 questions one last time. He found the hermit sowing the seeds in the earth that they had dug the day before. The hermit stood up and looked at the emperor. But your questions have already been answered. You know that was coming, right? Well, how's that? The emperor asked, puzzled. Yesterday, if you had not taken pity on my age and given me a hand with digging these plant beds, you would have been attacked by that man on your way home. Then you would have deeply regretted not staying with me. Therefore, the most important time was the time you were digging in the beds. The most important person was myself, and the most important pursuit was to help me. Later, when the wounded man ran up here, the most important time was the time you spent dressing his wound. For if you had not cared for him, he would have died, and you would have lost the chance to be reconciled with him. Likewise, he was the most important person. The most important pursuit was taking care of his wound. Remember that there is only one important time, and that is now. The present moment is the only time over which we have dominion. The most important person is always the person whom you are with, who is right before you. For who knows if you will have dealings with any other people in the future? The most important pursuit is making that person, the one standing at your side, happy. For that alone is the pursuit of life. Our growth as conscious human beings are marked not so much by grand gestures as by extending loving attention to the minutest particulars of our lives. Every relationship, every thought, every gesture is blessed with meaning through the wholehearted attention that we bring to it. Thus, one of the most important ways to live our life is to pay loving attention to the minutest particulars of our life. The complexity of our minds and lives, we easily forget the power of observation, right? Yeah. Yet without observation, without paying attention, we only live on the surface, and usually in a most self-centered way. Those who live by using others are selfish people. So look at your foundation. In this simple story about the emperor and the hermit, you heard the 3 ways or the stages to live life. The first stage was where the emperor used others for his own benefit, by using the hermit to answer his own questions. The second stage was demonstrated when both the hermit and the emperor worked together through cooperation, where the emperor took the hermit's needs into account as well as his own needs. And the third stage in the story was the third way of life, learning to live for one another. Throughout the whole story, you could begin to see the spiritual advancement of the emperor. Right? A disciple is a person who is conscious in every situation and knows the inner motive and character of the people he deals with. A disciple's progress in life depends upon his understanding of who he is and what he is and who and what other people are. Are you with me? Okay, I see some frowns. I was thinking today, I was watching the news this morning, and you know the big brouhaha, if you excuse me, I say this respectfully actually, where Hillary Clinton is going to be announcing, you know, her running for the presidency. And immediately, you know, all the panelists are discussing and you know, giving the percentage of people that like her and the percentage that don't, and why they don't, and because of the emails and so on and so forth. And as I was thinking about the talk this morning, that how important this is, because we do consider ourselves to be disciples. We do need to be conscious of every situation that's going on. Not so much paying attention to the media. I mean, we'll get news, you know, but is the news accurate? Is it correct? We need to look into the background of that person, you know, into their family life, particularly, and then look at their accomplishments, to see what's real instead of the anger and the fabrications and the, you know, the wrong motives behind the people that are trying to make sure that she does or does not win. So, but in addition to that, you know, as we advance in our own discipleship, we need to remember that we are building our sensitivity. And in building our sensitivity, that means that we're going to be conscious in every situation. We cannot any longer, like we did when we were children, where we were so busy playing that we didn't see what was going on around and about us, or that we didn't take time to learn about our friends, you know, and what we were playing with, or we didn't take time to learn about our neighborhood, unless, you know, we were an exception. And there are exceptions today. But now, in our adulthood, we need to readjust and refocus the way we're living our lives. And this includes being conscious and knowing the inner motive and the character of the people we are dealing with. Right? Okay. A disciple's progress, I'm repeating myself here, a disciple's progress in life depends on his understanding of who he is and what he is and who and what other people are. This eradicates illusion and delusion and confusion. Spiritual advancement does not depend on speculations about how many and what kind of angels are in heaven and what sort of harp playing is going on in paradise. I was so glad to learn that. Not being a harp lover myself. You know, we were taught these things as a child, and I was so obnoxious because I would say, if that's what it means to go to heaven, I don't want to go. You know, how boring it is. Okay, but I'm sure it was, surely it must have been metaphorical, you know, surely. Anyway, now the teachings are say, don't depend on these speculations. We'll find out when we get there. In the meantime, we are here. What about understanding where we are? What our foundation is made of and what our motives are. The essential is that we examine our own motives fearlessly. We have to question ourselves about why we are with other people. Our deepest motive is selfish. If it is, then not only are we retarding our own spiritual progress, but we are no better than animals. To see into our underlying motives means to confront ourselves and to know exactly who we are. We can only proceed on the path of evolution when we are willing to see what we are at heart. A disciple is a person who is willing to unveil himself to himself. This is the supreme act in life. Simplicity and sincerity are the result of self-confrontation. So the truth is that everyone covers himself in relations with others. Unless a person has a teacher who is able to remove the coverings so that he has the chance to know what is hidden, then there is no way to change. There's so much resistance to change. There really is. And I think the older we get, the more resistance there is, unless somewhere down the road we met that teacher that had a hammer and a chisel, and we allowed that person to begin to help us see ourselves, who we are, who we were not, who we are not. And then this is what happens. At least I know it did with myself, and I know with so many people around me, is that when they began to see glimpses of what they could be, glimpses of their beauty, a deep understanding that we each do have a soul, then we became disgusted with what we saw at that moment, in that moment of what we were. And so in that moment, it was like a twofold process, where on one hand it was shocking, and the other hand, it was inspirational because it was a vision. And then we began to walk the path of evolution. Simplicity and sincerity are the result of self-confrontation. The truth is, like I was saying, that everyone covers himself in relations with others. As long as concealment continues, there is no hope for transformation. So I know this is a little heavy this morning, the talk is heavy, but here so many of us are reading books about transformation. And if we're in the teachings, we're reading about sublimation and transformation and transfiguration. So we have a lot of book knowledge about these three aspects, of life. Now is the time to set aside our book knowledge, all these definitions, that we keep looking up, because we haven't yet experienced it, so we have to remind ourselves what that definition is, and now say, okay, today is the day. I'm going to allow sublimation to take place. And then through sublimation, transformation occurs. And it really occurs. It doesn't just tell us in a book that it occurs, it's really happening. So that's that moment of confrontation. We are confronting the past with a vision of what we are intended to be in the future, what our soul intended us to be, the motive of the soul for drawing us back into incarnation. This was the intent and the motivation of our soul, to see our beauty, and then to live these principles that Torquem Saradarian gave us of beauty, goodness, righteousness, joy, freedom, which then leads into striving and sacrificial service. When we begin to live these 7 principles, there's no turning back, because we had that moment where we glimpsed at the beauty of our future. We had that taste of freedom. We understood truth and honesty and self-confrontation. And we understood the beauty of putting others in front of ourselves. There is no choice but to face oneself. Once we do this, the royal road of spiritual progress opens up for us. When people live for one another, it is the goal of the teaching of Christ. Although so few ever seriously try this, all his teaching is based on demonstrating how we can live for one another. Of course, in order to live for others, it is necessary to forget yourself completely, entirely. It is so difficult to sacrifice selfishness and live for others. But this is the only way of living that leads toward freedom, expansion of consciousness, and the higher worlds. The third way of living, there is love without the expectation of reward or advantage. A person who lives for others wants only to give himself away. He wants to give all that he has and all that he is so that others may progress. What a blessing it is to know such a person. When you begin to give, a current of energy starts to circulate in your system. The more abundantly you give, the more this divine circulation will flow through us. So we need to cultivate ourselves so that we have something beautiful to give others. It's like last weekend we had a meeting for what I'm calling our vegetable committee, garden committee. Imagine what they're going to have to do. Plant, what do you call them? Beds, I guess. The what? Raised beds. Bring in the soil. Bring in non-GMO seeds. Come out here every week and water and water and water and watch these vegetables grow and then give them away. But you can taste them along the way too. I just think it's such a wonderful example of what we can do. We must have wisdom and harmlessness in order to give. We cannot live for other people as long as we are not harmless. To be harmful creates ego and the expressions of ego. It is the ego that causes every harm, and if we want to advance, it must be destroyed. So I have 7 points that I'm going to leave you with, short points. Information about how to live your life. Information how to live my life. These are 7 steps. And I'm not going to elaborate on them. We're going to elaborate through our living it. Okay. The first step is to learn the science of giving. The second step is to heal people. The third step is to educate people. The fourth way is to protect people from themselves. The fifth way is to keep silent. There are times when refusing to talk with someone is the right thing to do. Sometimes it is only our silence that can help another. The sixth step is to think good thoughts. And the last step is to speak in goodness. To speak in goodness. Right speech eliminates karma, while harmful and thoughtless words creates karma. So those are the 7 ways that we can live our life that is surefire guaranteed to change ourselves, to change our life. Okay, so I'm going to close with that, and we do have a little bit of time to ask questions. If you have questions, and if I can answer them, I'll try. Think of what we studied this morning, the 3 ways, to live our life. At the expense of others, to live with one another, and to put others' needs ahead of ourselves. Okay, any question come to mind? Any example? Okay.
When people come to do their taxes, they're often nervous and apprehensive, and I make it a real point to...
Is there a microphone? You were going to bring a microphone up to... You want to do that? Okay, they've got it set up. Sorry, Stan. Okay.
I make a real point to make them happy and bring something good out of the whole thing. But I've always thought it was self-defensive, so I didn't have to listen to the moans and groans. That if I gave them joy, I'd get the best back. And it works. How does that, in your table of doing good?
1, 2, and 3, right?
Yes, where am I at?
Yeah,
and
right.
Is it righteous to do that?
Right.
To want to get the best back because I give first.
Well, I think it would be stage number 2.
Okay.
It could be stage number 3, but this is your professional life. So you can include your professional life, in stage 3, but I think it's more difficult to do. So I would say it's stage 2, and I would love to come to you as a tax accountant. With that kind of attitude, that would be beautiful. Usually tax accountants, they're firm, and I rarely see a sense of humor. I rarely see a smile. And yeah, fair. What is that bottom line going to be? State level, federal level, Yeah, so that's wonderful. So, I would say stage 2. Okay. Saskia.
When do we know when to keep silence? If, for example, if a friend comes and is telling you whatever is happening in her life, and you know what is happening, but if you speak out, it's gonna be rejected. So is that the moment to keep silence, or is there another ways of knowing when we should keep silence instead of speaking?
Okay. Yeah, it's a really good question, and the discussion on silence can be quite profound, actually. I learned about silence through music. When you play these great symphony pieces of music, and as a violinist, I would have 15, 20, even 50 measures of silence. Okay, what did I do during that? First of all, I had to count every single measure, because if I came in the wrong measure, I was in a lot of trouble. So that meant I had to pay attention. What was I paying attention to? I was paying attention to everything going on around me, paying attention to the second violins and the oboes and the kettle drums and so forth. I had to really pay attention to every single thing that was going on, while at the same time being ready to pick up that violin and play again. Okay, so when you're listening to somebody who is in a state of, let's say, illusion or delusion about themselves, and you're not giving any feedback, they're going to continue to talk and talk and talk and talk. They will not even know you're silent. Okay? So, the second thing is, you know, in your silence, you're going to realize you're not going to save that person. Okay, so after they're done talking, you've had all of this time to think about what kind of a response this person really needs. And what they need is a diversion from themselves. A diversion from themselves. Okay, so you talk about anything that is made of those 7 principles that would apply to them, but not about them. Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Louis.
Someone has asked if you could repeat number 2 of the 7.
Oh, I was afraid that was going to happen. Okay. Because I don't want to paraphrase. I may or may not be able to find it. Here it is. The second way of living is you begin to live with one another instead of at each other's expense. I'm not here to get something from you. Now we are taking one another's needs and accounts, you know, into account. Did they follow that up with a question? When the motive is to live with others, others' needs are taken into account as well as their own needs. And the third one, just to repeat, the third one was the third way of living exists for human beings who learn how to live for one another. So there's 2 key prepositions here, I guess. You begin to live with one another, as it says in stage 2. And stage 3 is to learn how to live for one another. Live with and then how. Okay? Any other questions, and then we'll close.
How do you protect people from themselves?
I don't know that this is a real explanatory answer, but you know, that could take 15 minutes, but I can tell you in a nutshell. You know, you protect people from themselves by loving them, not arguing with them, not counteracting your opinions with their opinions, not telling them they're stupid, they don't know what they're talking about. You know, to protect them from themselves is to be an example of love, and all that that requires. It doesn't mean to be passive, it doesn't mean to be their doormat, you know, but really give them examples of substantial love, such as forgiveness. You know, and the teaching is ripe with all kinds of virtues, you know, to help protect others from themselves. When you forgive others, you can't hate others. When you really forgive them in your heart, and it takes time. If that person has really harmed you and really damaged you seriously, then you're going to, first of all, have to understand and decide and educate yourself, you know, what does it mean to forgive? Why does every major religion talk about the importance of forgiveness? So as you begin to take in the energy of forgiveness, then this magic happens. You begin to realize it's your benefit, to your benefit, to forgive those that have harmed you, that have damaged you. And in that process, love comes into your life, and then you begin to heal.